My name is Patrick Farrington. My company's Farrington Building. I do high-end finished carpentry in Boston, South Shore, and Cape Cod. Right now we're standing in an old home that was recently renovated, and I did all the finish work throughout the house. And what I'm going to walk you through is the steps that I took to install this baseboard, which can be especially tricky when you're in an old home. First thing we're going to do to install this baseboard is first cut back this floor protection. And I'll just cut it back about 8 inches or so I have enough room to run my scribe up against the baseboard. This is all on a finished floor, pre-finished. So I'm going to be really careful with my knife not to just cut right through the ram board. And then I'm going to go ahead and tape down our floor protection so that no debris gets underneath that could lead to scratching the finished floors. So you want to make sure that you use a tape, especially on pre-finished floors or any finished surface that has a gentle adhesive, so that when you pull it off in the future, it's not going to pull up the finish that's on the floor underneath. This is an old home, so we know that our floor is not going to be level. Well, the easiest way to do it would be set a laser level, and we're going to take measurements at various points throughout the room. The height doesn't matter right now. I just want to know the difference between each corner of the room. I'm going to go ahead and write in that measurement, 7 1/8. And then if I compare it to this side, and this is just over about 8 feet, I am 8 7/16. We'll continue on. Get one in the middle here, 7 13/16. So from the corner to the middle, we're about 3/4 of an inch out. And from here, 7 3/4. Okay, so that's actually not too bad. We're about 5/8 of an inch out from corner to corner on this longer run, but we know that in the middle, there's a little bit of a belly. So we need to make sure that we're leaving enough room to be able to scribe and have enough room on our baseboard to hit that dip in the middle. So what we want to do is find the lowest point, which is going to be your tallest measurement to the laser. So our lowest point in this case is the corner of the room over there. So if we were to set our baseboard level throughout the entire room, we'd start there and we'd scribe off the material. At our lowest point, we'd have full width baseboard, and at our highest point, we'd only have about 3 inches of your baseboard showing. To me, you're losing too much material, and the baseboard would not look proportional at the highest point in the floor. So in this case, we'll split the difference between parallel and level, leaving enough room to scribe our pieces in. So what do I mean by scribing a piece in level versus parallel to the floor? If we set it parallel, you'll be able to reference from the baseboard to the window how out of level the floor is. And if we set it level, you're going to have a smaller face on your baseboard on one side versus the other side. The best way to find this medium point or this balance point between level and parallel is to cut the piece that's going to fit here, and we'll hold it in place and we'll see what looks best. It's really just going to be more of a preference. So this side is my inside corner. What I like to do on this is just give it a little bit of relief. So I'll cut baseboard at a little bit of an angle, 2 or 3 degrees. That way I have relief up against the plaster, but that cut will get covered by my piece that's being coped into it. So I'll cut it at an angle, but I leave it square up at my base cap. That way I can pull from the square point for my length. You wouldn't want to pull from the short point that you just cut off. When cutting this material, I like the blade to run from the top of the baseboard back. That way I'm avoiding any splintering or blowouts on my material. So now you can see with our full piece in place, the dip in the floor and how out of level it is. I'm going to take a 3/4 of an inch block and split the difference, and I'm going to see how that looks. 1 1/8. So I'm about a 1/2 inch out of level at this point. Then I'm going to just take a step back and see what I think looks good. I ended up shimming up the low side of our baseboard another 1/4 of an inch, and I think that's going to be our best middle ground. We're within a 1/4 of an inch across our window apron, so when you're looking at the baseboard, it doesn't look too out of level to our apron. You'll see a little bit of a difference in the floor, but it's hard to avoid that in these old homes. So I can go ahead and cut my end here up against our casing, which I left long intentionally so that I could find our height. I'm gonna go ahead and mark the top, and I'm gonna mark the bottom. So I'm using my combo square, I'm butting it in up against the outside of my casing, and I'm just marking the end of my ruler here. So now I know I gotta go from up here to down here. find out what that angle is, and we'll cut that. I'm gonna put a mark on my block here so that I know where I want my shim to be. I'm lining up my square with my tick mark on top of the profile here. I'm taking my other square as a straight edge, and I'm lining it up from my square. And then I'm just gonna go ahead and mark that out on the face of the baseboard. Now I have my angle. It's actually not too bad. It's actually pretty square. So I'll set my saw at 90. We'll cut close to that line and see how good that looks. Okay, so that to me looks pretty good up against our casing, this cut. I'm gonna put my shim back where it was. I made a tick mark on there just so I knew exactly where I wanted it. So whenever you're scribing something, you wanna make sure it's in the plane at which it's gonna be in its final point. So I want it tight against the wall so that when I'm using my scribe to the floor, I'm scribing my mark onto the piece in the exact location that it's gonna be in. I'm also gonna double check my heights and make sure that still look good. 8 5/16 there. I'm happy with how everything looks. So now I set my scribe to our highest dimension. This scribe has an adjustment here that I can raise and lower my lead. And I just want to make sure that I'm exactly on the bottom there. Or you can use a more traditional scribe like this. But what you want to do is just check that your scribe touches just the bottom of the point of your highest point. So as I run my scribe along my baseboard here, you can really see how this line is starting to grow from the bottom of our piece. So you can really see the drastic difference in our flooring here. I'll show how much face we end up leaving here. So rather than having about 3 inches there, because we're finding that middle ground, we end up with about 4 inches left on the face of our baseboard here. So I'm happy with that number. I think that's proportional to the rest of the baseboard. We're only taking off about 1 inch of material here rather than 1 3/4 inches. Take this piece outside to the table saw. All right, so first thing I'll do is I want to set my table saw to a bevel. I'm gonna cut along this line here. This is a freehand cut on the table saw. This is the way I do it because this is not a straight line. So you can't just set this piece on an angle using a jig or anything like that because that's not a straight cut, so you gotta move the piece as you go along. You can also do this with a jigsaw or a skill saw. I find that for me, in my setup, it's easiest to do this on the table saw. I try to get as close to the line as I can without taking off my line. I use my front hand to guide the piece and my back hand to manipulate it. Things to make this cut safer is having a nice outfeed table so that it can support the weight of your piece. So now we'll take this piece inside and we'll finish our scribe cut by cutting up to this line with I'm gonna use a sander for that. The beveled edge helps you just creep up to this line because when you take your sander to it, block plane, file, whatever, you are removing less material, so it's easier to get a nice tight fit up to your line. Important to make sure that you're holding your sander or block plane or whatever on an angle that matches the back bevel of your piece. That way that when you're removing the material, you're still continuing to remove the material up and behind away from your line. And I try not to take too much off at once. I like to gradually work the whole piece, removing a small amount of material at a time until I reach up to that line. Now I'm just gonna spray this cut end that goes up against the wall, hit it with a little bit of primer. It's also helpful to clamp your board down too, so that it can free up the second hand and you're not trying to hold the piece while you're scribing the piece. So I'll just test fit the piece. Make sure I'm happy with everything. So you can probably see here up against this wall, we just put a little bit of a back bevel on this piece. That's just so that I'm not fighting this plaster on this wall and I can get my piece nice and tight. Our next piece that goes along this wall will have a cope on it and it will cover up this gap, all this gap up against the wall here. If there was any high spots or gaps, I'd go ahead and scribe a little bit more off, but in this case, put a little pressure down on the piece, and it fits pretty good. Next step is going to be finding our studs on this wall so that we can nail this baseboard off. I'll carry around a magnet in my belt. So once the magnet sticks to the wall, you know it's hitting a screw. That screw is going through your blue board or sheetrock. So I know that there's probably a stud here, and I'll test that by just taking a screw or a nail. And you want to see that you hit something solid. So if that's the case, I'll go ahead and I'll just stripe a line up the wall. Another way you can do it, if you don't have a magnet, or a quicker way to do it, is you find an outlet on your wall. More often than not, you know that this outlet is nailed into a stud. I'll look at where the outlet is and I'll test to see if I hit a stud on one side of the outlet. So there's nothing here on this side of the outlet. So I'll go ahead and try the other side of the outlet. So that was solid. I hit a stud. I'll go ahead and make a line. I can use my tape, measure every 16 inches, and I hit my 16-inch increments on these two studs that I already have. These two are lining up. As you can hear, that one again is solid. So we'll go ahead and mark that up. When you're using your nail or screw, whatever, to find studs, you want to just make sure that you're nailing it in below the height of your baseboard, so you're not putting any holes in the wall that won't get covered. Stud again. You could just mark every 16, but this is an old home, so I like to verify that I am in fact hitting studs, because you just never know. I'll go ahead and I'll do this for the entire room that I'm working in so that everything's laid out before I go to nail something off. Extra step that I like to take when installing my baseboard is priming all of our raw surfaces. So I'll go ahead and just take a spray can of primer and hit this raw edge. It can be kind of a hassle to do, but I think it's a good thing to protect this raw edge. It's gonna make your piece last longer. Anything that spills on the floor, or if you're mopping and water gets underneath, it's just gonna protect this wood and protect your paint job and protect the final product. So I think it's worth the extra step. So I'll let that dry for a second. Another extra step I like to take is putting construction adhesive on the back of my trim material. This just allows for an extra bond and extra strength from my piece to the wall. I also, on the face of my material, like to use as minimal amount of nails as possible. So I'll use an 18 gauge brad nails on my baseboard. On my end cuts, I'll just apply a little bit of wood glue. This is the end that's gonna butt up against my casing. It'll help strengthen that joint and also seals the end of this piece. All right, so. On my cope end, I'll leave that without any nails until I get this coped piece fit in there, and then when I go to nail off my next piece, I'll finish nailing this part off right here. We know we can set our piece in level on this wall. We're only about 1/4 of an inch difference in height from the front of the wall to the back. So it looks good up against our window casing, and it'll look good going across the floor. We're gonna cope our long piece. Now I'm gonna walk you through the steps of how I cut my copes. What you want to do is just cut your baseboard at a 45-degree angle for an inside corner. So that's how the piece would go in if you're going to do a mitered joint on the inside corner. And what we're going to do now is cut along this line on a back bevel. Okay, so now we're going to continue this cut here along this line of our baseboard. Basically, we want to cut right up to the point where our bevel meets the face of our material, and we're going to cut all this on a back bevel so that when we're done with this cut, we can insert this piece over onto the next piece that it butts into. You can use a hand coping saw or a jigsaw. I like to use a jigsaw. Some people can use a table saw. So you might see on my jigsaw here, I have this coping foot, and that just allows me to put my jigsaw at various angles so that I can cut this piece while maintaining a back bevel. So I cut up close to my line. It doesn't look pretty right now, but we're gonna go ahead and use files to file it down and get it right up nice and tight to where the primer meets my beveled cut. It's kind of just like scribing, where you're removing material right up to your lines. You don't want to be too aggressive when you're doing this, because you don't want to go past your line. And now I'll take a piece, pretty good right there. Butt this up to my piece. So now I'm in tight to the wall, I'm up tight to my piece that I'm going up against. And now I gotta set this baseboard level. I'm gonna raise the laser up to the height of the baseboard right here. So the laser's set in the corner, in our controlled corner. I'm gonna take shims. So I'm setting that top of our level line there. Tacking this piece here. Looks like there's a little bit of dip in our baseboard here, so I'll just put a shim in the middle. My piece is set on shims, level all the way down. Now I need to scribe the height of my baseboard down to the height of this baseboard that's already installed. I can set my scribe on the top of our piece here and match it up to the height, the piece I need to scribe down. So I'm gonna remove that amount of material off the bottom all the way down. The length of this wall is longer than our longest pieces of baseboard, so we have to do a joint on the face of our baseboard to extend this piece all the way to the corner. So that's called a scarf joint. So in order to cut this scarf joint, I think it's good to cut it on a stud. So I'll make a mark there. All right, let's go ahead, take this piece outside to the table saw. All right, so here I am cutting my scarf joint. I'm setting my saw to an angle. I choose an angle that my saw has a preset to. So in this case, I always go 22.5 because my saw locks in. When I go to cut my next piece, it's gonna lock in on the same angle and it's gonna line up perfectly. Make sure you put a square edge up against your fence. I already cut my scribe here, so I gotta put the top side of my piece up against the fence. I'll go ahead and cut that line. The reason I cut it on an angle is to create a longer glue joint, so it's going to become a stronger joint that way. The other thing I like to do is add in dominoes or biscuits to this cut, so that's going to increase the strength of this joint The tricky thing here with the dominoes is just making sure you cut it in deep enough. So I set my machine to my lowest setting. When I butt the machine up to the piece, it's not tight here at the top. So I want to make sure that I'm going extra deep into my material so I have enough room to fit my tenons in place. Take my piece now and prime the bottom edge, just as I did with the other pieces. I think we just need a minute for that to dry. Okay, so now we can go ahead and fit our long piece here, make sure we're happy with that scribe and the cope. If we're good with that, then we can fit this last piece. So it looks like we're a little tight at the bottom, but that's why we leave this piece a little loose. I'm gonna go ahead and just try to put a finish screw in down here. That's a lot better. I just sucked that in right to the wall there. You can see the gap here is even. Now when I go to butt this piece in, we have a nice connection between the two pieces. Now what we're gonna do, just take a measurement. On our last piece here, we scribed tight to the wall. So we're happy with that cut there. The coped end is nice and tight, so we can just take a measurement. And that will be to the long point of our scarf joint there. I'll square a line up here, and I'm gonna cut it just proud of that line, so we have a nice tight fit. I like putting bevels whenever I know I can hide it and it's gonna be butted up against the wall. That way you have less material hitting that wall and therefore a tighter connection to that wall. All right, so then I'm gonna flip my piece over, bevel my saw. It's gonna lock in on 22.5 degrees. That's why I like to choose angle on my saw that has a preset dimension there. So now we can just cut this on the long point here. Okay, so we're nice and tight on that scarf joint. Actually, could just take a touch more off, which is good. And then I'll set this piece in level. In this case, with a shorter piece, shorter run, it's a little easier to just use nice stick level here. Surprisingly, the floor is level right there. So now I'll set my scribe to this difference, just as we did earlier. Okay, and I'll check it in this spot as well. Take this piece outside to the table saw. Making my marks for the domino. Okay. We're gonna glue this scarf joint up out of place because it's gonna be hard to fit the pieces in along with the dominoes. Then we'll fit the whole piece into place. Anytime I'm gluing a joint together, I wanna make sure I get a nice even layer of glue along my surface. Enough that I'll have a little bit of squeeze out, but not too much. My dominoes. Make sure to get some glue in the domino hole. A little bit of squeeze out there is a good thing. And then I always apply glue to each surface. Put these two together out here, and then I'll put the whole. Okay. I'm also going to add construction adhesive behind my baseboard as an extra strength for the security to the wall. And I'm also going to add some construction adhesive behind my cope. I don't mind if a little construction adhesive squeezes out with my cope joint in the corner. All that does is just fill up any little voids or any little imperfections in my cope. So in this case, I'm just gonna add the construction adhesive to the wall first. With this long piece, it's just gonna be a little bit cleaner. Put it on the wall rather than on the piece. Extra work, but I think it just helps with the longevity of this trim install. This is why I applied the glue to the wall. It's a little more challenging working a piece that's 20 feet long Just gonna double check that my cope's lining up. You gotta be careful with the copes, especially with how much you back cut it. It becomes pretty fragile, but that looks good. Everything's lined up. It's in there nice and tight. This little bit of glue squeeze out, I'll clean that up with a wet rag. I'm not worried about it. And like I said, it kind of fills in any little voids if there are any in your cope. Installing my baseboard, I like to put pressure down on the piece so that I'm holding it tight to the ground. In this case, I'm using brads through the base cap and 15 gauge at the bottom. Okay, now I'm gonna keep my nails away from this scarf joint. So this here is kind of a unique scenario where our walls aren't flat behind it. So it's making it difficult for this joint to line up perfectly. So I'm just taking a block and clamping this piece tight to the wall while also shimming this side of the joint out. And you can see how it's closing that joint up. And then I'm gonna use pinch dogs to help close this joint up even further. Good pressure on the joint as it cures is a unique scenario, I would say. We're in an old home, so not every scenario is perfect, but you can try to figure out ways creatively on the fly to make sure that that joint is sitting exactly how I want it. All right, so we're almost done with our baseboard install in this room. We have 2 outside corners to finish off here. This corner here is our lowest point in this room. So you can see if we set that baseboard level across the room, our baseboard's too short to carry that line. So we're just gonna run full height of baseboard here. Pre-cut this piece to my scribe line up against the wall. I also back beveled this. And anything going up to a finished surface, if you back bevel and remove that material, you're gonna get a tighter fit. So on my outside corners, mark a line on the back side of my piece, and I'll make a tick mark up here. And then I want to indicate the way I want that miter to go. So that's going to be the short point of my outside miter. I know, again, I'm working in an old house and all of my corners are going to be square. So I'm just running 2 squares along the wall. Just a quick way to see if you're square or not. And it looks like in this case, this wall is actually square. I can go ahead and cut this piece on a 45 degrees. So I got a kind of a short piece, shorter than I would normally like to work with. I'm gonna put just a straight edge behind here. That way my piece doesn't want to kick into my saw here. And now I wanna cut to this point here on my short point. I'm gonna make a cut first and be just shy of that point, and then I'll make my final cut. So that looks good to me. I'm gonna prime the bottom and my back cut here. Okay, so we have our first piece cut. I'm gonna go ahead and just rest that in place right here. And then what I wanna do is level a line across and use that as a reference to scribe my next piece into place. Now I'll take this piece out of the way, set my baseboard in here and just see how we're looking. That to me looks pretty good. A little bit of a scribe on the floor, but from here to here, you can see that we are level. And that's a good point because now we got a full height baseboard turning our corner and going into the hallway. And I'm gonna just cut this long. So let's go out, cut a 45 on this. And I'm gonna also rip a beveled edge on our bottom here so I can just fine tune that scribe down onto the floor. All right, so let's just test, see if this 45-45 miter works. That to me looks like it's gonna work pretty well. So we're nice and tight up top. You can see it's a little open at the bottom. A lot of times, especially up here in New England where we plaster homes, you get a lot of buildup down here. You can go ahead and smash that out. That's the quick, easy, and messy way. You can also take this piece on the table saw and just rip a taper on it, which is what I like to do. I like to do this method on shorter pieces. I think it's just quicker and easier for me. If this was a longer run, might be a little bit more challenging, so I tend to do this method just on these shorter pieces. So now you can see, bring these two pieces together, and that miter is now closed at the bottom. I don't have any buildup interfering with that cut. So it's good to check for those things, because it might not be your cut. You might think it is your cut, but there's other things going on like plaster buildup that can kick this piece out on an angle and affect your miter. So it's good to check for something like that before you go ahead and start messing around with your miter. 100% confident with that, so I can go ahead and mark my outside corner on this side. Same thing, I make a mark up top, and then I always put a tick mark to indicate the way I want the miter to go. I'll go ahead and get this cut, make sure I'm happy with it, and then I can go ahead and install these pieces. So I've already tested my fit. Everything looks good. I'm gonna go ahead and get some adhesive on the wall. And now I'll glue up my outside corner. An even amount of glue on each side. So I always like to get my outside corner clamped before I nail anything off. So I'll work that in nice. Get any excess glue off here. It's easier to do without the clamps on. So on my outside corners, I take these spring clamps, and these just put tension on that miter. Anytime I put together a miter, I always like to use clamping pressure rather than just nail it off, because that way I know it's going to be holding consistent pressure against that joint as it cures, rather than if a nail could seem tight and then it kind of loses its strength as you manipulate the rest of the piece to install it. So I always use these clamps. They're easy to use, and it just pinches the two pieces together and holds it nice and tight while I can nail off the rest of the piece. Okay, now that I got that clamped up, I'll go ahead and put a couple nails in on this side. So these spring clamps, they just leave like a little pin-sized hole. So I don't mind using a few extra just to make sure I get a nice tight joint. I'd rather fill a couple pin-sized holes than to have to try to fill an open miter. Go ahead and nail this off on this side. In this case, our walls happen to be square, which makes our life a little bit easier. If they weren't square, you can use angle finder and set it to your outside corner, and that'll give you the angle of your outside corner along with the miter cuts that your cut needs to be. And maybe an even easier way to figure it out is just using two pieces of scrap material, and you cut them and fit them until you're happy with your miter, and then you use that angle on your finished pieces. I have the chance here to come back and look at my work and see how everything's held up. It's been about 6 months. Everything's done, painted, homeowners are ready to move in. You can see in this case, our inside corner looks really nice, and I take those extra steps so that the product, one, holds up, but also turns out looking really nice in the end. I'm happy with how everything turned out, and I think we made a lot of the right decisions during the process of installation.